Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, check your phone, and see one headline everywhere. Supreme Court ruling could decide $2,000 stimulus payments. Suddenly, it's not just another news story. It's about your rent, your groceries, your gas tank, your child's school supplies. It's about whether you feel a little relief this year or whether the pressure keeps building. Right now, millions of Americans are hearing rumors, headlines, and social media posts claiming a $2,000 stimulus is on the way. Some say it's guaranteed. Others say the Supreme Court could strike it down before it ever reaches your bank account. And in the middle of all this noise, you're left asking one simple question. What does this actually mean for me and my family? Here's the truth. The talk of $2,000 payments is tied to a bigger legal fight, one that's unfolding at the highest court in the country. The case centers around federal policies and funding sources, including tariffs that some leaders have proposed using to fund payments to Americans. But here's the catch. The Supreme Court's decision could either keep those funding tools alive or wipe them out completely. If the court approves the policy behind those funds, it could open the door to payments. But if the court strikes it down, that revenue could disappear overnight, and with it, the promise of $2,000 checks. And here's something even more important. As of now, no new stimulus has been approved by Congress or scheduled by the IRS. That means everything you're hearing is tied to proposals, court cases, and political decisions that haven't fully played out yet. So this isn't just about politics. This is about the difference between relief and uncertainty for millions of households. And in the next few sections, we're going to break down exactly what the Supreme Court is deciding, why it matters, and what could happen next, so you know exactly where your wallet stands. Why the Supreme Court is suddenly in the middle of stimulus talk. You might be wondering, why is the Supreme Court involved at all? After all, stimulus checks usually come from Congress passing a bill and the president signing it into law. That's how previous payments were approved during the pandemic, but this situation is different. This time, the conversation around $2,000 payments is tied to a legal battle over tariffs and executive authority. Some policymakers have suggested using money collected from tariffs to fund direct payments to Americans. That sounds simple enough on the surface. If the government collects revenue from tariffs, why not return some of it to the people? But the legal question is much bigger than that. The Supreme Court is being asked to decide whether those tariffs were imposed legally in the first place, and here's where things get serious. If the justices rule that the tariffs were not legally authorized, the government could be forced to refund massive amounts of money to businesses that paid those duties. That would mean less available revenue, and potentially no funding source for any proposed $2,000 payments. But if the court rules the tariffs were legal, that revenue could stay in government hands, and that could strengthen the argument for sending part of it back to American households. So the Supreme Court isn't voting directly on a stimulus check. Instead, it's deciding on the legality of the funding source behind it. And that decision could either unlock the door to payments or slam it shut. For you, that means the outcome of one court ruling could shape whether relief money becomes reality or remains just another headline. The $2,000 promise, proposal or reality. Let's slow down and separate fact from hype, because this is where many Americans are getting confused. The idea of a $2,000 payment has been floated publicly as a possible dividend or stimulus funded by tariff revenue. But here's the crucial point. No law has been passed, no bill has been approved, and no payment has been scheduled. That means, as of right now, the $2,000 stimulus is not an official program. It's a proposal tied to political promises and legal outcomes. In fact, reports say that there are no federal relief payments scheduled and no stimulus legislation currently approved, and the IRS has not announced any new checks or rollout plans. So why does it feel like everyone is talking about it as if it's guaranteed? Because the possibility of $2,000 payments is being linked directly to the Supreme Court's upcoming decision. If the funding mechanism survives the legal challenge, supporters say payments could become more likely. If it doesn't, the idea could collapse entirely. For families already struggling with rising costs, that uncertainty is frustrating. You might be budgeting, hoping, or even planning around money that may never come. And that's exactly why this ruling feels so personal. It's not just about legal theory. It's about whether the promise of relief becomes a real deposit or just another political talking point. What happens? If the court approves the policy now, let's imagine the first major scenario. The Supreme Court upholds the policy behind the proposed funding. If the court rules that the tariffs were legal, the government keeps the revenue collected from them. That could create a financial pool that lawmakers or the administration might use for programs, including possible direct payments. In that scenario, the conversation around $2,000 checks could gain serious momentum. It wouldn't guarantee payments overnight, but it would remove one of the biggest legal obstacles standing in the way. From there, the process would still need to move through Congress or be structured under existing legal authority. Lawmakers would have to decide who qualifies, how much each person gets, when payments would be sent, and how the program is funded long-term. So even if the court approves the policy, checks wouldn't appear instantly. There would still be political negotiations, budget decisions, and administrative steps. But psychologically, for millions of Americans, that ruling could feel like a green light. It would signal that the funding source is intact and that relief is at least possible. And for households stretched thin, even the possibility of $2,000 could mean hope. What happens? If the court strikes it down now, let's look at the opposite outcome, the one that has many people worried. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the consequences could be immediate and dramatic. The government could be forced to return huge sums of money to businesses that paid those duties. That would wipe out the very revenue some leaders have proposed using to fund the $2,000 payments. In simple terms, it would be like planning to give your family a bonus at the end of the month, only to find out your paycheck was just taken back. In that situation, the proposed stimulus would likely lose its main funding argument. And without that, the idea could stall or disappear altogether unless Congress steps in with a new plan. For many Americans, that would mean the difference between paying off a credit card, fixing a car, catching up on rent, or just breathing a little easier. And that's why this ruling carries so much emotional weight. It's not just a legal decision, it could shape the financial reality of millions of households. Why Congress still holds the real power. Even though the Supreme Court decision is getting all the attention, there's one critical fact you need to remember. Congress still controls the final decision on stimulus checks. Every major stimulus payment in the past, from the pandemic-era checks to other relief programs, came from laws passed by Congress. That means even if the Supreme Court clears the path, lawmakers would still need to draft legislation, negotiate the details, vote on the package, and send it to the president for signature. So the court's ruling is more like a gatekeeper. It decides whether certain funding sources are allowed, but it doesn't automatically create a stimulus program. For you, this means the fight over $2,000 payments doesn't end with the court. It could just be the beginning of a political battle in Washington. The reality check. Many Americans aren't hearing. Here's something that often gets lost in viral headlines. No official $2,000 stimulus program exists right now. According to reports, there are currently no approved federal relief payments, no scheduled checks, and no new stimulus legislation in progress. That means many of the posts and videos claiming checks are coming soon are based on proposals, rumors, or political promises, not actual law. And that matters, because misinformation about stimulus checks has led to scams, fake IRS messages, and fraud attempts. So while the Supreme Court ruling is important, it doesn't guarantee anything in your bank account. The truth is simpler, even if it's less exciting. No law equals no stimulus, no funding equals no checks, and no IRS announcement equals no payment schedule. It's not what people want to hear, but it's the reality. How this decision could affect your daily life. You might be thinking, okay, but how does this actually affect me? Let's put it in real terms. For a family living paycheck to paycheck, $2,000 could mean a month of rent, a stack of grocery bills, a car repair that keeps someone working, or catching up on debt that's been haunting them for years. That's why even the possibility of these payments creates hope and anxiety. If the court approves the funding path, people may start planning for relief. If the court blocks it, that hope could disappear overnight. And in a time when prices still feel high and wages don't always keep up, that kind of uncertainty can be emotionally exhausting. What to watch in the coming weeks? So what should you actually pay attention to? There are 3 major developments that will determine the future of the $2,000 payments. 1. The Supreme Court ruling. This decides whether the proposed funding mechanism survives. 2. Congressional action. Lawmakers would still need to pass a bill or approve a program. 3. Official IRS announcement. No payment is real until the IRS confirms it and sets a schedule. Until all 3 of those steps happen, the $2,000 checks remain a possibility, not a certainty. How previous Supreme Court decisions change stimulus plans. To understand what could happen next, it helps to look back at history. This isn't the first time the Supreme Court has influenced economic relief, government benefits, or the way federal money reaches American households. During past crises, including the pandemic, the government moved quickly to send out stimulus checks. But behind the scenes, many programs faced legal challenges. Some policies were delayed, altered, or even canceled because of court rulings. And every time that happened, the people who felt the impact weren't politicians or lawyers. It was families trying to pay their bills. There have been cases where the Supreme Court stepped in and said the federal government went too far with certain programs. When that happens, the policy doesn't just change on paper. It can stop money from flowing into real homes, real bank accounts, and real communities. That's why this new ruling matters so much. If the court decides the funding mechanism behind the proposed $2,000 payments is not legal, it won't just affect government budgets. It could cancel the entire idea before it ever reaches Congress for a vote. But if the court allows the policy to stand, it could create momentum. Lawmakers may feel more confident pushing a stimulus plan forward, and in Washington, confidence often turns into action. So when you hear about this case, remember this. The Supreme Court doesn't just interpret the law. Sometimes its decisions shape the direction of the economy, the future of relief programs, and the financial stability of millions of households. And this ruling could be one of those moments. Who would qualify if payments were approved? One of the biggest questions people are asking right now is simple. Who would actually get the $2,000? Even though no official program has been approved, experts believe any future stimulus would likely follow patterns from past payments. That means eligibility could be based on income, tax filing status, and household size. In previous stimulus rounds, individuals earning under certain income thresholds received the full amount, while higher earners saw reduced payments or no payment at all. Families with children often received additional amounts per dependent. If a new $2,000 program were approved, it could potentially follow a similar structure. Full payments for lower and middle-income households, reduced payments for higher earners, possible additional funds for dependents. But here's the key point. None of these details are official yet. Until Congress drafts a bill, there are no confirmed income limits, no eligibility rules, and no payment formulas. And that uncertainty can be frustrating. You might be wondering whether you'd qualify, whether your family would get the full amount, or whether you'd miss out entirely. Right now, the honest answer is this. No one knows for sure. The details will only become clear if and when lawmakers actually pass a stimulus program. The timeline, when a decision could turn into a payment. Even if everything goes perfectly, if the Supreme Court approves the policy and Congress passes a stimulus bill, payments wouldn't appear overnight. There's a process. First, the Supreme Court would issue its ruling. That could take weeks or months, depending on the court's schedule and the complexity of the case. Next, Congress would need to act. Lawmakers would debate the details, negotiate funding, and vote on the final package. That step alone could take weeks, especially if there are disagreements between parties. After that, the president would sign the bill into law. Then, the IRS would step in. The agency would need to set up payment systems, confirm eligibility process, millions of payments, and distribute funds through direct deposit, checks, or prepaid cards. In past stimulus rounds, it took several weeks after the law was signed for the first payments to arrive. So even in the fastest, most optimistic scenario, Americans would likely wait weeks or even months between a Supreme Court decision and actual money in their accounts. That's why it's important not to plan your budget around a payment that hasn't been approved yet. Right now, you're living in the space between a promise and a decision. On one side, there's the idea of $2,000 payments that could ease pressure on millions of American households. On the other, there's a Supreme Court ruling that could either keep that possibility alive or erase it completely. For you, it comes down to this. The decision isn't just about tariffs or legal authority. It's about groceries, rent, bills, and your family's peace of mind. And the truth is, in times like this, staying informed isn't optional. It's essential. Because the next ruling, the next vote, or the next announcement could directly affect your wallet. So keep your eyes on the headlines, watch for official updates, and make sure you're following reliable sources. Because when decisions like this come down, the people who stay informed are the ones who are ready. And if relief does come, you'll want to know the moment it becomes real, not just a rumor. Your financial future may depend on it.